Alright, so for my national reading panel project, I got some inspiration from my niece who just recently had to do a science fair project for her school. So I thought, well, I guess I can kind of do a little experiment of my own about the 5 components of reading. So we're going to start in the middle and then work our ways outside into the 5 components, and then I'm going to basically just explain each one to you guys and show how I investigated and researched and observed within my classroom to determine if all 5 components of reading are important. In my project, you'll see some definitions of each component put into my own words, and then a student's point of view of each on the trifold board. So let's take a little closer look. So my purpose in all science fair projects, all experiments have to have a purpose, is to find out which of the 5 components of reading are essential for students' success in reading. And then my hypothesis, my thoughts were, and I would say that these are probably the 3 components I concentrated the most since I've started teaching in my classroom, but obviously as we've been going through this course, it has changed a lot, and I've started to incorporate all 5 of them in my room. But my original hypothesis, I would probably say for the past 2 years, has been, I think that components of phonics, vocabulary, and comprehension are essential to success in readings. They were pretty much all I taught in my classroom. Phonemic awareness really wasn't involved, and I understood why we needed to teach fluency. I just never really found it to be a key part of my reading instruction. So that's what my hypothesis is. And we will get to the conclusion after I explain each one of the sections for us. So the first one that we're going to start with is phonemic awareness. So this one is the most basic, but for some, they would argue this is probably the most important, especially when it comes to success later in reading. So phonemic awareness is able to be able to hear and manipulate the phonemes in words. Phonemes are the sounds that we hear in the words. This component is a strong predictor of reading and spelling success later in life. A way that you can practice phonemic awareness in your room is with a lot of fun and engaging activities. A lot of the stuff I've been doing in my room, I found that my kids love to do. One game that we do a lot is my end is your beginning, and that's simply where you have a kid say a word, and then the next kid has to begin their word with the last person's ending, or the first person's ending sound. So for example, if the first person said cat, the next person would have to say a word that starts with the ending sound of cat, which would be t. So they could say tall, and then ladder, then earth, thing. So it's just the ending sound of your word has to be the beginning sound of the next person's word. That's why it's called My End Is Your Beginning. My kids love this one. Next, you could do is the Elkanon boxes, which are good visuals where you have a picture of the object, like a picture of a cat, and they have to find each sound. So there would be 3 boxes below it: a box for the k, the beginning sound, a box for the middle sound, a, and a box for the ending sound, t. And they would point to each box as they're saying the sound k, a, t. These, again, involve no letters, because phonemic awareness, all it is just hearing the sound. You're not putting any pencil to paper, you're not attaching it to any of the graphemes, the letters, it's just the sounds. And then the last one is take it away. I've been doing this a lot in my morning meeting to help kids practice it, and I found that I thought they were going to be a lot better at this than they are, but they find it pretty tricky, but they still think it's fun. So it's where you just take away the beginning sound of a word or the ending sound of a word. So if I gave you the word jog, now I want you to take away the beginning sound. The word is og. If I gave you the word cat and told you to take away the ending sound, the word is cat. So it's just deleting the beginning or ending sounds. You could also do this with substitutions, too, where you could say, okay, change your beginning sound of jog to make your beginning an L. That would change it to log. Those are some ideas that you can use. And basically, a mindset of a kid is that you need to have students say that, how in the world am I expected to read or spell a word if I'm having trouble or cannot distinguish between the sounds that make up these words? If I can't hear the sounds, how do you expect me to eventually attach them to a letter and begin to spell them, which is the next step in reading. So this one is definitely very basic, and I haven't really worked a lot in my room, basically because I always felt like word work had to be you writing words down or you looking at a word and reading it. So hopefully with me using this more in my room, I'll be able to see a little bit of a difference, and my kids love doing these activities. So, and the next group that we have is phonics. So phonics is being able to hear phonemes in words and represent them with letters from the alphabet or their graphemes. Sorry, I need to focus on my part a little better. So they hear the sounds and write the letters that make the sounds, or they see the word and use the letters to piece together the sounds each letter makes to read a word successfully. So here are some examples of ways you can practice phonics in your room. Making words, where you put letters and then they get to cut them out and move them around into pieces and create words. So if you had like A and E and then S and T, then you can make sat and set. Ask them to maybe say, or change the beginning sound to a P, that would change set to pet. Change the ending sound to N, it would change pet to pen. Things like that. I use making words in my room almost every day. Initial sound sorts. This is really good for my friends that are getting ready to learn the letters of the alphabet, the sounds of the letters of the alphabet especially. So for example, the words like anchor, apple, angel, they would all fall under an A whenever you're sorting them. So if you have a column that's labeled A, that's where they would put all those. And then B would have, B, bicycle, bat, things like that. And then the last one is nonsense words, and my kids love doing this. So I tell them, when you're making words, you need to try to make as many real words as you can with your letters, and then after that, fill the rest of your box with nonsense words. So if you had B-R-A-T, you can make brat, but if you had an F in there, you could change it to braff, which is a nonsense word, but it's still funny to say. And it truly shows that a kid can read that word, that they truly know the graphemes that make up that word. They truly know the blends that make up those words to really be able to read it for you. They don't just remember it because it's a sight word. They already know it. So your students are past the stage of hearing and manipulating sounds and words they hear. So now they're ready and hungry to read and write them. So I can hear my students saying, I want to read these books and text on my own. These books are made of these words. You've already told me the sounds, taught me the sounds with phonemic awareness. Now sounds are made of letters. Now teach me to represent those sounds with letters, and I'll become a better reader and writer. So it's just moving on to the next step. So now we move on to fluency. And fluency is, in my hypothesis, is one that I said that I didn't think was essential for success in reading. But once, I did research and watched videos and saw, even a difference in the little bit of time that I've been using it in my classroom, definitely see that it's essential. So it's basically being able to read with speed, accuracy, and prosody or expression when you're reading. So changing your voice to meet the characters. If they're sad, happy, if they're a man, their voice is low, and all that stuff. One of the teachers in my building, when we were talking about fluency, basically said that if you have good fluency, your reading sounds like you're talking. It's smooth. It changes depending on the emotions and the setting of the story and the situations that the character's in. So some strategies that you can use in your room to increase fluency are teacher-assisted reading. So you read a line, especially a line that has dialogue, and ask your kid to read it the same way you did. Just the other day we were reading a book where the dad kept losing things. So he said, the dad said, "Where are my keys?" Now you read it. And they would say, the dad said, "Where are my keys?" And they changed their voice. And we did that probably 4 or 5 times. And then after we read the book together, I noticed that when we got to that page, they were more confident. They were able to read it faster, change their voice, and it was smooth. And it was definitely the easiest one of them to read. And we just practiced it 3 or 4 times before we read the book, so it didn't take any time. Next is read to self. Not just one book just once, but reading a book several times. And I ask my students, when they do read to self, they're like, I'm reading the same books. And I'm like, yeah, but every time that you read them, you get better. By the first time that you read it, you had to stop at some words and think about them and decode them. Now you just read straight through them, you get done with this book in like 3 minutes, where it used to take you 5 minutes to get done with it. So you're getting better at it, and you know the words that are in there, and when you see them in other books that you're reading, you don't have to stop and decode them. You can just read right through them. It's the purpose of reading to self. So it's kids reading to self and then partner read, so they get a chance to hear another student reading to them. And I think in our book, I remember reading that kids that at least get 10 minutes of reading with a partner, even if they're just sitting listening to the partner read and following along, that some kiddos, if it's really effective for them, can almost increase 1.6 grade levels in reading, I think is what it said. It was somewhere in our book again. Maybe I saw it on our website. But I can truly believe it, because a lot of my lower readers that I don't have very many books in my library for, and those books don't have a lot of words, so they go through a lot in a day, that I have read with a higher reader. They're more engaged, they seem happier, and I see them in my reading groups reading bigger words that I wouldn't expect. And I think it's because they're just following the patterns and seeing the similarities, and more engaged and listening to their peers rather than listening to me talk all the time and teach them strategy. So I could see where it would help. So your students might be thinking that, I need to understand this text to do well on my independent work and on my test. Comprehension is never going to happen if I have to stop and decode these words as I'm reading. I need to get in my groove when I'm reading so I can remember and understand the most. So I don't want to stop. Keep reading through the words, add emotion to it, because it makes it more engaging and more interesting, and that's going to help me remember more, get through the book quicker, and be able to work on my comprehension a lot better too. So I think it completely makes sense that fluency, depending on how low or high it is a good predictor of comprehension. Alright, so now we're moving to the other side of the board with vocabulary. And this is one that I have always done in my room since I began teaching, because I love teaching vocabulary. I don't know why, I just do. And my kids seem to enjoy it too. So vocabulary is being able to define and understand the words in a text. So it's a strong predictor of comprehension of a text. And basically it's because they don't have to stop and decode words as much, and they don't have to stop and think about what they mean, and they're not as confused at the end of a story. So teachers, I believe teachers need to be very intentional when teaching vocabulary. It should include words students will be seeing in their content areas or in text they're about to encounter, like during their reading mini lessons. It can be taught before you ever introduce the text. A lot of times I teach it on Monday, and they don't see the text until Tuesday, and sometimes even Wednesday, but they've already heard the vocabulary, the big tricky words in the story. That's the way the student can fluently read through the word. They know what it means, they know how to spell it, they know how to read it, they don't have to stop and decode it. And they can keep going to be more successful during comprehension. It also can be taught incidentally too, and I do this in my room as well, through read alouds, where you just stop and explain the words in kid-friendly terms and then just keep going with the book. This is my favorite thing to do in my room, especially in a whole group, but my students love it too. And so here's some things I do in my room with vocabulary. So on the spot definition during read aloud. So I actually did this earlier today, where we were reading Charlotte's Web, and one of the parts said that said that Fern peered into the box at Wilbur. And I just simply stopped and said peered is just an over for look. So she just looked into the box at Wilbur. She peered into the box, she looked into the box, and we kept going, and they understood what was going on. Another thing that my kids love to do for vocabulary is acting out the words. So sometimes you can't do this with all of them, but a lot of the ones that I pick, I try to make sure I at least have one every day. Today, the words that we did were snapped, chopped, and squeezed, and we could act out all of those. So when they did squeeze, they act like they had like something squishy in their hand they were squeezing. Some kids even hugged, like they were hugging and squeezing someone really hard with their body. With chopped, they were doing like karate chops with their hands, like they were chopping a piece of wood in half. And then with snapped, a lot of them grabbed their pencils and act like they were going to snap their pencils in half. So acting those out just gives them extra clarity on the definition of the word. So when they get to them, they're thinking, oh, that's whenever I stood up and act like I was chopping something. So that means something's getting tore down, something's getting broke really bad, something's getting tore in half, or something's getting holding it really hard in my hand for squeeze. So it just helps them understand the meaning a lot better. And then another thing that I always use, and I usually use this for practice, sometimes even for an assessment, if they have the definition of the vocabulary word down or not, if they were paying attention during the lesson, is a Frere model graphical organizer. So in my Frere model, I have the definition, and then they have examples where they can either write examples or they can draw me pictures, and then a non-example. So for chopped, you would have a picture of a tree that's been chopped down, and then a non-example would be a tree that's just intact and standing right up and looks perfect. And then I have an opposite part where they write what the opposite of the definition would be, and they can even try to come up with a word to go with it too. A lot of Frere models do characteristics, and some of them do a drawing section too. So there's a lot of different versions of the Frere model, but the one that I like using allows a lot of my lower readers who can't really put their thoughts into words just yet, and a lot of my ELL kids that don't know a lot of English are able to put their thoughts into pictures. So that's why I like the one that I use. So basically your students are thinking, I'm reading this book and I'm successful decoding the tricky words, but I have no idea what they mean. Or maybe I'm having trouble decode these words, so if I can't even read them, how in the world am I supposed to tell you what they mean? If I can't do that, it's making this text confusing for me. So if I'm confused by a few of these words in here, don't know what they mean, how in the world do you expect me to retell this story to you or be able to answer questions for you? And that's probably what you're going to expect of me the next day with some comprehension. But I can't even understand the words that are in it, so help me with that. Alright, and then our last one, comprehension. So comprehension is being able to understand the text that you've read. So it's basically just all of these components that we've read. We've talked about phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and then comprehension is where our final destination is. And it's where we want all of our kids to be, or to eventually get to. So when we have made it to the final component, students are now able to put together all their skills and read a text and be able to use what they learned to retell the story or to answer questions about the story. Basically show you that they understood the text. Some ways students can demonstrate and practice comprehension are verbal retelling, where you're just saying, hey, so tell me what happened in the beginning. Oh, tell me more. Oh, what happened in the end? Oh, okay. Well, good. So what were the characters? What was the setting like? What was the problem in the story? So having them retell every component, important part of the story that they heard. Next is just answering questions. I think of this as a lot of the who, what, when, where, and why, the 5W questions. So who's the character in the story? What were they doing? Why do you think they did that? How do you think the story would change if they decided to do this? And you can turn these questions into really good, deeper thinking, higher order questions too, or you can just do very basic. Who is this story about? I really like doing who, what, when, where, why questions, and I like letting my kids create them for a text that we've read as a group, and then give them to a buddy to see if the buddy can answer the question. And the trickier that they make the question, the better. And then last is a story map, which a story map is kind of like verbal retelling. It has a lot of the components, but they're putting it into writing instead of just retelling it to you. So they usually have to say the characters, the setting, the problem, the solution, the theme, and then they have to usually tell you what happened in the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story. I use story maps a lot in my room too, for accountability with my friends that are doing read to self, just making sure that they're actually reading the book and getting comprehension when they're reading them, and not just going through and just reading the words and not getting anything out of it. So what your students might be thinking is, so I know sounds of the words, my phonemic awareness, then I use letters to show them with my phonics, then I read these in the book with accuracy, speed, and with expression, so I have fluency. I know the tricky words in the book because you did a very intentional, specific vocabulary lesson with me the day before, so my vocabulary is good to go. Now I can finally read this book successfully and be able to keep the information in my brain, not have to worry about being able to just read the book, so I can finally retell and answer questions about the book and really show my teacher my understanding of it. So that was my board and all the components on it. And like I said, at the beginning of my teaching career, I definitely only focused on phonics, vocabulary, and comprehension. And I don't know if it was just I was lazy, intentional. I think I just the other components just didn't seem as important. And to be honest, I just didn't know a lot about them. And it's kind of hard to and scary to incorporate those elements in your room if you don't even know a lot about them. So I'm very thankful that this course helped me with them, and I do feel like my kids are more engaged. I have way more activities for them to do during reading workshop, and so there's a lot less off-task behavior. They're more engaged, and they seem more excited about reading, and I am too. And so just in closing, just to connect all of these components. So all of these components are connected. Students should start with a phonemic awareness and progress through to get to comprehension. But if a chance that a student that is having trouble with any of the later components, like let's say comprehension is something that they're starting to struggle with, then maybe they're lacking in one of the previous components. So you should backtrack. You can have them do a few of the activities I've explained to you, see how they perform, find assessments for phonics, fluency, phonemic awareness that your school provides, and see how they perform. And if they seem to be lacking in that area, then maybe you just need to have time to let them master that skill and help moving them forward in the components of reading. So each one of your students is going to be unique and different, their backgrounds and how they've been taught with teachers and what they've learned and what they've missed. So you, right now as their teacher, have to lead them to the reader that you want them to be, starting at the reader they are today. So it's our goals as reading teachers to find the areas they excel, to motivate, but also to find the holes to fill so they can truly become a well-rounded reader and they're ready to read any text that's thrown at them, whether it's a standardized test, a newspaper, or a job application when they're later on in life. I think it's just our responsibility to help them grow, but also go back and fill in the holes that they might be missing. So that is my project on the 5 components of reading, and I hope you enjoyed all 22 minutes of it.